Nobody expected this from him, a biker gang leader. Leather jacket, tattoos, reputation that scared the whole town. But one night, in a small roadside diner, he noticed something no one else did: bruises. On a waitress's arm, fresh, hidden, silent, and in that moment, everything people thought they knew about him was about to be shattered. The town had already decided who he was long before he ever spoke a word. A biker gang leader didn't need an introduction there. The leather jacket, the roaring engine, the tattoos, to most people, that was enough evidence. They didn't see a person. They saw a stereotype. Parents pulled their children closer when he walked by. Shop owners watched him through the corner of their eyes. Judgment came quickly, comfortably, and without question. That same judgment is exactly why no one else noticed the waitress. She moved through the diner like a shadow, quiet, polite, doing her job without drawing attention. The regulars saw her every day, yet somehow saw nothing at all. Not the way she flinched when someone raised their voice. Not the sleeves she kept tugging down even in the heat. Not the tired eyes that carried more weight than long shifts could explain. People were too busy deciding who the bad guy was to notice who was actually hurting. Judgment has a way of narrowing vision. When we label someone as dangerous, we stop looking for humanity in them. And when we label someone as normal, we stop questioning what might be wrong. The town assumed the biker was trouble, so they watched him closely. They assumed the waitress was fine, so they never looked twice. But truth doesn't live in assumptions. It lives in details. The man everyone feared noticed what everyone else ignored. Not because he was trained to. Not because it was his job, but because he wasn't blinded by his own comfort. He had seen pain before real pain, and he recognized it when it tried to hide. The bruises weren't just marks on skin. They were signs of a story no one had bothered to read. Judgment didn't just fail the waitress, it protected the person hurting her. While the town focused its suspicion on the wrong man, the real danger walked freely, unchallenged, unseen. That's the quiet damage of prejudice. It doesn't just mislabel people, it misdirects attention. It teaches communities to fear the obvious instead of questioning the familiar. When we judge too quickly, we stop listening, we stop observing, we stop caring, and in that silence, suffering grows. The irony was impossible to ignore. The man everyone avoided turned out to be the only one paying attention. She never asked for help, not once. No shouting, no tears in public, no dramatic moment that forced people to stop and look. And that was the problem. Silence has a way of making pain invisible. The waitress showed up every day on time, did her job, and kept her head down. To the outside world, that looked like strength. But often, silence isn't strength, it's survival. When someone lives in fear, staying quiet feels safer than speaking out. Silence becomes a shield even when it's slowly breaking them from the inside. Most people expect victims to look broken. They expect loud cries, obvious panic, clear signs that something is wrong. But real pain doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides behind forced smiles and routine movements. Sometimes it learns how to stay unnoticed because being noticed once made things worse. The bruises told a story her mouth never could. They were carefully hidden, but not erased. Covered by sleeves, explained away by clumsy excuses, brushed off with a nervous laugh. And every time someone accepted those excuses without question, the silence grew heavier. Each ignored sign sent the same message: you're on your own. Silence is often misunderstood as consent or weakness or nothing at all. But in reality, it is one of the loudest cries for help there is. It's the sound of someone who doesn't feel safe enough to speak. Someone who has learned that words can have consequences they're not ready to face alone. The diner was full of people, yet she was completely isolated. That's the cruel paradox of silent suffering. You can be surrounded and still feel trapped. Everyone heard her take orders. No one heard her fear. Everyone saw her serve food. No one saw what she carried home at night. It takes courage to speak up, but it takes awareness to listen without being asked. The biker understood something others didn't, that help isn't always requested. Sometimes it has to be offered. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't to ask for help, but to endure another day. And sometimes the responsibility falls on someone else to notice the cracks before they become fatal. Silence didn't mean she was okay. It meant she was waiting, waiting for someone to see past the quiet, waiting for someone to believe what the bruises were saying. Power is often mistaken for volume, for anger, for the ability to dominate a room with fear. That's what the town expected from a biker gang leader. They imagined explosive reactions, reckless violence, and chaos wherever he went. If anyone had confronted the situation with fists or threats, people wouldn't have been surprised. That image was already built in their minds. But real power doesn't lose control. It holds it. When he noticed the bruises, every instinct could have pushed him toward rage. Anyone could have lashed out, demanded answers, or created a scene that drew attention. But reacting without control doesn't protect victims, it often puts them in more danger. Loud anger invites consequences that the silent sufferer has to pay for later. He understood that. Self-control is the discipline to pause when emotions demand action. It's the ability to think beyond the moment and measure the impact of every move. He didn't turn the diner into a battlefield. He didn't expose her in front of strangers. He didn't make her fear what would happen next. Instead, he waited. Waiting wasn't weakness, it was strategy. By staying calm, he kept her safe. By staying quiet, he kept control of the situation. He chose timing over impulse, awareness over ego. That kind of restraint doesn't come from softness. It comes from experience. True strength knows when not to strike. People who lack control act to feel powerful. People who have power act with purpose. The biker knew that if he acted out of anger, the focus would shift from helping her to stopping him. The story would become about violence, not protection, and she would be left to face the aftermath alone. Self-control also shows respect. By not forcing the issue publicly, he gave her dignity. He allowed space instead of pressure. He made it clear that she wasn't a problem to be solved, but a person to be protected. In a world that glorifies instant reactions, restraint is rare. It doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't demand attention, but it's often the difference between making things worse and making things right. That night, the biker didn't prove his strength by what he did loudly. He proved it by what he refused to do, and in that restraint, real power revealed itself. Most people grow up believing safety has a uniform, a badge, a title that clearly announces who is there to protect and who isn't. In the town's mind, protection came from official places, institutions, authority figures, people who were supposed to help. And because of that belief, everyone else felt exempt from responsibility. When something felt wrong, they assumed someone else would handle it, someone trained, someone authorized. That night, no one with a badge noticed the bruises. No official report was filed, no questions were asked. Protection didn't arrive through protocol, it arrived through awareness. The biker wasn't obligated to care, it wasn't his job. He didn't have legal authority or social approval. In fact, helping her came with risk to his reputation, risk of misunderstanding, risk of becoming the target of blame. But real protection isn't about permission, it's about presence. Sometimes the people society trusts the least are the ones who step up first. There's an uncomfortable truth in that. Systems don't catch everything. Rules don't see what people refuse to notice. An authority can only act when someone speaks up or when damage becomes impossible to ignore. Until then, protection depends on individuals who are willing to get involved when it's easier to walk away. The town believed safety was someone else's responsibility. The biker didn't. He understood that waiting for the right person can mean waiting too long. That mindset is how abuse continues in plain sight, hidden behind routines, familiarity, and the assumption that someone official must already know. Protection doesn't require a badge, it requires courage. It requires stepping into discomfort. It requires seeing a human being before seeing rules, status, or public opinion. The irony was sharp. The man people feared breaking the law was the one who respected something deeper, the responsibility to protect the vulnerable. He didn't need recognition, he didn't need authority, he needed the will to act carefully and deliberately. When protection comes from unexpected places, it challenges how communities define safety. It forces people to question whether they rely too heavily on titles instead of values, whether they confuse responsibility with job descriptions. That night proved a hard lesson. Safety isn't guaranteed by uniforms or positions. Sometimes, it depends entirely on whether someone chooses to care enough to step forward. No one expected the town to change overnight. Small places rarely do. They run on routine, on familiar faces, on unspoken rules about what to notice and what to ignore. For years, people had looked the other way, convincing themselves that what didn't interrupt their daily lives wasn't their concern. Silence had become normal, and indifference had settled in quietly. Then one act disrupted that balance. It wasn't loud, it wasn't public, but it was deliberate. What the biker did that night sent a ripple through the town, not because of who he was, but because of what his action represented. When people learned that the man they feared had stepped in where everyone else had remained passive, it forced an uncomfortable reflection. If he noticed, why didn't they? If he cared enough to act, what excuse did they have? Communities often change not through speeches or laws, but through moments that expose collective failure. This was one of those moments. It held up a mirror to the town and showed them the cost of looking away. The waitress wasn't just a victim anymore. She became proof that suffering can exist right in front of people who believe it couldn't happen here. After that night, things shifted. People started paying closer attention. Conversations changed. Whispers turned into questions. Questions turned into awareness. The town didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became more awake. And awareness is always the first step toward responsibility. One act challenged long-held assumptions. It challenged the idea that danger always looks obvious, that heroes always fit a certain image, and that silence is harmless. It reminded people that morality isn't owned by institutions or appearances, it's practiced by individuals, one decision at a time. Change doesn't require everyone to move at once. It requires one person to break the pattern. Once that pattern is broken, others begin to see that they had a choice all along. The biker's action didn't just help one woman, it gave the town permission to care again. That's how communities evolve, not through fear, but through example. When someone acts with integrity in a moment where no one is watching, it raises the standard for everyone else. It makes indifference harder to justify. One act didn't rewrite the town's history, but it changed its direction. Heroes are often imagined as people who wait for the right moment, the right approval, or the right set of circumstances. Society teaches that action should come after permission from authority, from the crowd, from systems designed to decide what is acceptable and what is not. But real heroes don't move that way. They understand that waiting for approval can mean waiting while harm continues. That night, no one gave him permission to act. No one asked him to get involved. No one would have blamed him for walking away. And yet, he didn't. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He didn't calculate how the town would react or whether his help would be misunderstood. He acted because something was wrong, and that was reason enough. Heroes don't wait for validation. They act from conviction. They understand that doing the right thing is often uncomfortable and rarely applauded in the moment. Asking permission can be a form of delay. It gives people an excuse to step back, to pass responsibility, to protect their own comfort. But when someone is in danger, time matters. Hesitation can cost more than action ever will. The biker knew that involving himself came with risk, but he also knew that doing nothing carried a greater one, the risk of becoming complicit through silence. True heroes don't announce themselves. They don't seek recognition or reward. In fact, many would prefer anonymity. Their focus isn't on how the story will be told later. It's on what needs to be done now. They understand that morality isn't something to be voted on. Permission is often rooted in fear of being wrong, fear of standing alone, fear of consequences. Courage, on the other hand, accepts consequences as part of responsibility. It doesn't mean acting recklessly. It means acting deliberately despite uncertainty. What made his action heroic wasn't authority or strength, but decisiveness. He chose responsibility over comfort. He chose involvement over distance, and in doing so, he challenged the idea that only certain people are allowed to make a difference. Heroes don't wait for the world to tell them it's okay to care. They decide that caring is non-negotiable, and when they act, they don't just change outcomes, they redefine what courage looks like. That night didn't end with applause, sirens, or headlines. It ended with something far more important: accountability. The town learned a hard truth. Danger doesn't always look the way we expect. and heroes don't always come from places we trust. Sometimes, the person everyone judges is the only one willing to act. Sometimes, real courage steps in quietly, does what's right, and walks away without asking to be seen. What mattered wasn't who he was supposed to be. What mattered was what he chose to do. And from that moment on, the town would never look at strength, protection, or silence the same way again.